Hey guys, this is Woodshop Junkies and today I'm jumping back in with my table saw restoration series. Now, just to get everybody up to speed, a few months ago or quite some time ago I bought a Wadkin Bursgreen table saw with the hopes of restoring it to use it in my shop. Since getting it, I did some restoration work on the top and I replaced the 3-phase motor with a single-phase motor. I also stripped the entire saw and had some of the larger components sandblasted so I can paint it with a coat of primer. All these videos are available on the playlist, but I'll also link them in the description of this video. In today's video, I'm going to focus on cleaning the last few small components that I wasn't comfortable having sandblasted, because it's mostly machine parts and I think sandblasting them would have damaged them. So what I have here is mostly the spindle assembly and some of the height and tilting mechanisms. I've also got a range of bolts or imperial bolts that I'm looking at sourcing locally, but some of them I'm unlikely to find, so I'm probably just going to clean them up and reuse them. Then once everything has been cleaned up, I'm going to give it a coat of primer, the parts that need to be painted, and as far as possible assemble some of the smaller sub-assemblies. Right, so for my first step, I'm going to use thinners to clean off any surface deposits on the components, things like dust and oil and grease. I'm going to submerge it in here and then mostly use a Scotch-Brite pad and a little brush to get into the tighter corners. After that, I'll let it dry and I can move over to the next step. Right, so that's pretty much it for the thinners step, and it did a great job at giving all the components an initial clean. My next step was going to be a paint stripper step to get all the paint off, but the thinners actually did a great job at doing that as well once I had the components soaked for a little bit. So instead of going over to a paint stripper step, I'm going to use my cordless drill and a wire brush just to run over all the components once more. Hopefully this will get out the last bit of stubborn paint and maybe even give the components a bit of a metal shine. Right, so that's pretty much it for the thinners and wire brush stage, and for the wire brush I used a bit of a softer bristle because I didn't want to scratch the components too much. Now, as I mentioned, I was planning a paint stripper stage as well as a rust removing stage and maybe even a buffing stage, but after this I don't think it's necessary and I can move straight over to painting the components that need a coat of primer. I might spend a bit more time on the sign because I want it to be a point of attraction on the saw, but I'll do that after I've painted these components. Right, so these are all the components that are either going to be entirely or partially painted. For the partially painted components, I'm going to cover all the machined areas with some tape, or all the areas I don't want to get paint on, and then spray a coat of primer on it, which should protect it until I have time to do the final coat of paint. Okay guys, so that's all the components painted. Obviously some of them need to be turned around and painted again on the other side, but while I give the paint a moment to dry, I want to take some time and talk about the little aluminium sign for the saw. As far as I know, on the original saw, the raised lettering is not painted while the rest of the sign is. And I've thought about two ways to do this. I could firstly cover the entire sign with some tape, and like I did with the other components, remove the excess tape with a knife, then paint the sign, and when the paint is dry, remove the tape, and the lettering should still have an aluminium finish. But this seems a bit tedious, so I figured I'd paint the entire sign and just sand down the raised lettering. Hopefully it works, but if it doesn't, worst case, I need to strip off the paint and go with the other option. Okay, so that's the sign entirely painted, and I obviously gave it more than enough time to dry properly. Now the idea is to attach a piece of sandpaper to this plank and just work the raised lettering like that. The idea behind the large plank is to prevent this, because I obviously only want to remove the paint on the raised part of the lettering. Alright, so that obviously didn't really work. I was avoiding tedious work and ended up making more tedious work. And though it kind of worked with the primer, I don't think it will with the top coat. So when I do the final coat of paint, I'm going to have to go with the tape and tracing it with a knife option. At least all the letters are nice and flat now, and it's got a better finish than the dull aluminium finish it had before, so the exercise wasn't a total waste. Okay guys, so that's all the parts prepped and primed and ready for a final coat of paint. So I'm actually very close to finally assembling the saw and being able to use it. Now at this point you may have noticed that the fence isn't included in the restoration, because the fence I have is actually not the correct fence for the saw. So I'm still deciding whether I'm going to repair or adapt the fence to work with the saw or fit an aftermarket fence. Also, in the end, my OCD got the better of me, and I decided to respray the sign because I didn't like the way the aluminium filing stained the primer. So I decided to use the tape method, and I'm glad I did because it looks a lot better. Now earlier in the video I mentioned that I would have liked to start putting together some of the smaller sub-assemblies, but because I still need to paint everything, I figured it's easier to leave the tape and everything intact so I can do the final paint job before assembling everything. But that's going to have to be it for this video. I'm extremely excited to finally finish the saw. I know I've been busy with it for some time, but a lot of this is new to me, so I try to educate myself before attempting anything on the restoration. I would rather take longer and do it properly the first time. So in the meantime, while I source the paint to complete this project, I'm going to be working on some of my other shop upgrades. So I'll be back really soon with a new video. If you want to see what I get up to in my small shop or the rest of the restoration, remember to subscribe. As I mentioned earlier in the video, all the previous work done on the saw will be linked in the description down below. So if you haven't seen it, you can check it out there. As always, thank you so much for watching. Till next time, cheers.